Hey guys, it's Tom again. I just wanted to go through a couple more things with Vigoro here. There's an introduction video on the website and on the aescripts page as well, but I wanted to go a bit more in depth. So today we're going to look at making a flower, and that should let us go through quite a lot of the different options in Vigoro and get a slightly more in-depth look. So I've started up here. I've got my Vigoro panel down here. So the first thing we're going to make, I think, is the petals. So we'll just create a new comp name there. I'm going to drag the number of layers down to 1 for now. I'll just double check my settings, and that looks about right. And let's create the composition. So now we've got a new Vigoro composition. If you set this higher, obviously there'll be more shapes here. But what we're going to do first, I think, is just create the shape of this petal. And I've only made one here so that we can see sort of what's going on with the shape, rather than having lots of other shapes going on around it. So let's see what we got. We've got the circle size. We'll leave that for now. We'll adjust that in a minute. Circle, let's untick circle. So we've got a triangle. I'm going to leave the polygon sides at 3, so we've got a triangle, and then I'm just going to whack up the roundness here. Let's put that about 90, say. And that is slightly petal shaped, but I think what we want to do is sort of drag this in to make it thinner, and I could do that by dragging this, and this should be adjusting the scale on the controller layer here. So if I just untick this constrain proportions, set this back to 100, and then we can change the shape through the controller layer here, and that can be useful sometimes. But what I'm going to do at the moment, I think, is use the custom layer controls. So if we click the Vigoro shape here, at the top here you see we've got this panel, which is the custom layer controls. So we can adjust the position through here, and the anchor point, and sort of the Z position if we're using a 3D layer. But if I click this shape tab here, I've got a whole load more options. So we could change the colour to work independently of the way Vigoro's colouring it. We can adjust all the opacities, the angle of it if we wanted to, and also we could, if we had a couple of layers that were triangles, say, but we wanted a circle, we could force it to be a circle here, or tick the custom sides panel and choose how many sides we want for this specific layer. I'm going to leave these for now. The bit I'm interested in is this adjust scale here. So you can see it's set to 0, 0 at the moment, so it's not being adjusted at all. But if we drag this, now you can see that we're adjusting the scale of this layer, and this isn't affecting the scale on the controller at all. So this is going to be useful in a minute when we start to duplicate things, just so we don't have to deal with weird scales, numbers in here. So I've just made that, let's say, -20 and 50, and now we've got a slightly more petal shaped petal. So that's cool. What we could do now, if we wanted to just jump straight in and make a fairly simple flower, is just duplicate these a couple of times. So we've got a couple more shape layers in here. They're all within the stack still. Go back to our controller layer, go to distribution, and then if we just hit circle distribution here, it will arrange our shapes circularly. I'm just going to turn down the size offset at the top here as well. Just make that 0 so we can see what's happening a bit easier. So we've got our circle distribution. We can change the size of this circle, and you can see already we've got sort of a flowery type shape here. If I wanted this to be less, I could sort of animate this coming out or whatever. We'll get to the animation in a minute. But for now this looks quite good. But I think actually what I want to do is use the cloner to add a few more petals in, so we can add some more detail that way as well. So I'm just going to delete these layers again, So I'm just back to my my one layer here. Back on the controller, we'll go to cloner, hit enable cloner, and then hit radial rotation down here. And you can see at the moment this is just rotating this shape around itself. If I were to move this up a bit, so let's say 8, this is now just rotating around itself. If I turn down the end opacity, you should be able to see where they are a bit better. But let's make this radial size bigger. And you'll notice the distribution was working from the centre, whereas the cloner, this radial size, is going to be working from our main shape here. So it will be going down from that shape. So if you just want to use the cloner, you'll have to adjust for that. But for now, this looks pretty good, I think. Let's set this to, say, 100. And the reason we've set that to 100 will become clear in a minute. So the next thing we're going to do is duplicate these again, now that we've got our sort of shape that we want. I had 8 clones in there, so I'm going to make 8 layers here, so I'm just going to duplicate this. So now we've got 8 layers here, 8 Vigoro shaped layers. If I come back to the distribution, circular distribution is still set on. If I set this now to the same number 100 as the radial rotation, radial size, sorry, here, you can see that now it's going to be creating this really cool looking shape. Because we've got the same number of layers as we do clones, and the same circular amount here as the radial size. So this looks pretty cool on its own, but it's not what we want right now. Let's mess with it a bit. So we could change the size offset here, just to make these flowers a bit bigger. I think because this is going to start going off the screen, I'm just going to turn down the circle size a bit as well. So that's cool. We've got this size offset set up a bit here, and then we could turn down this circle amount a little bit. If we turn it down to, in this case, about 60%, 63%, you can see that now we've got this kind of quite nice flower shape. So that was really quick to set up. What should we do next? I think before we animate, let's mess with the colours a bit. So I'll just close these up for the moment. The appearance here, we can tick down. We can choose whether it's got a fill or a stroke. See, if I put a stroke on now, you're going to get this really kind of crazy cool effect. But let's stick with a fill for now. And then I'm going to come down to the colours tab here. And you can see at the moment it's working from this gradient. So if we set this top layer and bottom colour, top colour and bottom colour, it will gradiate between them. So that could be kind of cool, but I think I want a bit more randomness in this, so I'm going to set this to use the fill colour layer here. So if I hit fill colour layer and set that to the fill colour layer here, it's now taking its colours from this fill layer. And if I turn on visualize colour, there we go, you'll see some dots appear across the screen, and these are showing where the colours are coming from. So the right hand side here will be the top layer, so that's sort of an orange, which we can see here, and then the bottom layer will be this brown here. So that's cool. And if we want to offset the fill colour here, see, turn this fill colour back on. If I move this fill colour sample, it will move it up and down on the screen. So now let's move it to the top. The colours are slightly more blurred up here. So if I turn this fill colour off again, you'll see that now it's taking the colours from along the top instead of the middle where it was before. And if we had a stroke on this, we could do the same with stroke colour sample. So we might play with that in a minute. But for now, let's leave that a 0. And let's come into our fill layer. It's set up with a 4-colour gradient when you start Vigoro, or when you create a new composition, but it doesn't have to stay like this. We could use this gradient if we wanted to, but don't feel you have to, so I am not going to. I'm going to delete this, and now we've just got a white fill colour layer. So I'm going to change this to sort of more flowery colours. Let's choose a sort of a nice red here, and now it will be colouring all these layers with this red. So that's something, but it's not very easy to see what's going on. So I think we will go to noise and grain, and then turbulent noise. You can see it's added this noise in here. If we set this blending mode to overlay, it'll overlay this turbulent noise onto the colour of the solid layer here. So if I get rid of this now, you'll see that now it's colouring these based on where the noise is. And you don't have a lot of control over this because it's noise, but we could go through and sort of change the evolution settings here, and you'll see that it's changing the colours as we go. So we just want sort of a nice subtle look here. So if we go something like this, we can turn up the contrast on this turbulent noise a little bit so you can see what's happening. I'm just going to untick this visualize colour while we're here, just so we can see this a bit better. So now we've got this nice sort of flower shape. And I think actually let's add a stroke to this as well. So now this stroke is being taken from the gradient because we haven't set this stroke colour there. So if I just set this to fill colour as well, it's going to be the same as this at the moment. But if I visualise these again, if I move this stroke down, it's offsetting that. So we can offset this stroke colour on the same layer. So that's really useful. Let's turn the stroke thickness down a little bit, just personal preference here. So now we've got this kind of cool abstract flower shape, so we could animate it. So let's animate the scale. We should be able to get away with this, with just animating the scale, I think, for it coming in at least. So let's go to 1 second, set a scale keyframe, and then go back to 0 seconds and turn the scale down to 0. And now these will be offsetting and coming in. Before I preview that, I'm going to add an ease and whiz to this. We could select these and make them easy ease keyframes, and then mess with the speed graphs and stuff. But for the sake of this, I'm just going to use ease and whiz because it's quick. So let's set this to Expo, apply it, and now if I preview, you should be able to see our layers all animating up onto the screen. So look how quick that was. That's it's a really nice looking little animation, and that can't have taken us more than a few minutes to put together. That's cool, but I think actually what I want on this is for the front petals here to animate first, and they're coming out last at the moment. So we've got the times offset in the Vigoro control here. If we set this to 0.1 instead of minus 0.1, now the bottom layer will always animate in time with these keyframes here, but now the layers above it are going to animate before it, whereas if we put it to minus 0.1, they'll animate after it. So now if we go back, because these layers are now animating before the bottom layer, you can see that at the beginning of the animation the flowers are already halfway animated, the petals. So if we just grab these keyframes and move them along a bit, we can compensate for that. So now if I hit preview again, the front layer should be coming up first, and then the other layers sort of emerging behind it, which I think is, yeah, I like that a lot more. That's cool. So we could leave this like this if we wanted. But let's add a little more interest to it. So we've got these 2 keyframes here for the scale modifier. We could just go down to speed modifiers here. And because we're animating the scale, if we wanted to add in a little bit of rotation to this, we could just go down to the rotation within the speed modifiers and turn up the rotation on scale a bit. You can see those back layers now. You're going to want to select a point in your animation where you can see things animating a bit. So if I just go to here, this should be halfway through this front layer's animation. So if I turn down the rotation on scale a bit here, you can see that now this is just going to animate and just add a little bit of rotation into it. So that's cool. So on top of that, we could also add some roundness in. So round on scale here. If we whack that up a bit, we should be able to see what's happening. So as this is animating, based on the velocity that this is animating at, the roundness is going to go up. So if I go back here, you can see now it's animating and it's sort of puffing out at the end a bit. It's really cool. So these speed modifiers are really useful for just adding in a bit more interest into your animation. You can see the sort of the change we've made to that already. So that's really cool. So we've got some petals for our flower. Cool. Let's get rid of them. Let's get them off the screen when we want the flower to disappear. We could do this. We could scale this back down, but I think that will look a bit weird on this. I think what might look cool actually is if we use some cut effects here. So we've got our layers, we've got stroke and fill, and a good effect that works with the stroke enabled is this cutout here. If we enable the cutout, you'll see immediately that it's cutting out a section of these petals, and it's applying a stroke to that as well. So if we up the cutout size here, you can see we get this sort of nice, it's almost like a Gaelic pattern here. But if we were to change the offset on this cutout, you could see that the stroke is actually following the lines of this cutout now. So we're going to use that to our advantage here. I'll set that back to 0 for now. In this case we're going to set the cutout size to 100. Actually we're going to set it just a little bit above 100. So let's do 105. And this is so we don't have to worry about things going weird. The cutout offset, let's drag this offset down. So you can see when we drag this down, it's affecting all the layers. So I think we could animate this sort of coming out like this and disappearing, which might look kind of nice. And then if I took it the other way, you can see I could grow the flowers out, make sort of a nuclear symbol here. But for now, let's set this down. We're going to set this just so it's off screen here. Where are we? We're at 2 seconds. So I'm going to hit the keyframe thing on cutout offset of here, and then go to 3 seconds. I'm just going to move this up until we're just covered these up. There we go, so it's at 3 now. So that will have made a keyframe for me. If I go to my controller layer and hit U, you can see all the keyframes that have been made. So we've got this much and we've only got 4 keyframes, which is pretty cool. I'm going to add an ease and whiz to this as well. I think maybe for this one we use a quint. And now if I animate through, we should see the flowers animating on and then being cut off the screen in quite a cool abstract way. So we've got them animating on, and Now we've got them animating off again. So that looks pretty cool. I'm happy with that. So next up on the flower we need a centre to it. But what I'm going to do before I create that is I'm going to bake this now, because I'm happy with this. This is going to stay here how we want it. I'm going to go to the Bake Freeze button on Vigoro here. I'm just going to select Bake on all of these, and we've got 8 layers here which are going to be baked, so it's going to take a few minutes to go through. But just before I do that, I'll cut the video when I start hitting bake. But just before that, if we look at this now, you can see the speed that I'm scrubbing through, and it's not terrible, but it's not terribly responsive either. It's a little bit slow, and that's because of all the shapes we're using here. So if I go back to Bake Freeze, set this up to bake, I will bake, and then you should be able to see the difference in speed. So I'll hit Bake Freeze, and it's going. Okay, so it has baked the composition here. That didn't take as long as I thought it would actually, so I'll just hit OK on this. And now you can see if we scrub through, look how fast that's going now. And if we preview this, it'll be going almost instantly. So Bake Freeze is a really useful thing to do, and you'll see why we've done that specifically here in a minute as well. So next up, actually if we just look at these while we're here, we can see all the keyframes that have been baked, and you can understand why it's taken so long. There's all these different parts here that have been baked for us. So next, let's create the centre of the flower. I'm not sure what that thing's called. Let's have 4 layers this time, and create composition. And now we've got our new Vigoro composition. What I'm going to do, so we can reference it, and this is why I baked it a second ago, is I'm just going to find the Petals composition we just used. I have 2 here, so I've got to figure out that's the wrong one. So I'll just delete this so we don't get confused. We've got the petals here. I'm just going to drag this in. I'm going to stick this at the bottom under the Vigoro stack here, and now you'll see this is animating in the background. So that's cool. So now we can reference this and really use this to create what we want. So I'm just going to go through about 1.5 seconds where most of this flower is created, and then we can start messing with this controller there. So the first thing I'm going to do is just set down the circle size. So we want this to be in the middle here, say. Duplicate this a few more times. I'm going to set down the size offset, and then we'll change the circle size back up just so we've got thinner lines around the edge here. And yeah, that looks about the right size. If we go to the appearance and the colours, I'm just going to use the gradients this time. So let's choose some colours from here. Let's choose for the centre of the flower this sort of nice lighter one, and then the middle, let's choose this darker colour here. Actually, let's make this darker as well, again, just so we can see this here. Actually, you know what, I think maybe we don't want a red for the middle. I think we're going to sort of choose a slightly more interesting colour. So let's choose that sort of colour there. And that looks cool. Let's make it a bit more interesting now. First we could add some stroke back on, and set this to fill colour, and then this fill colour, I'm just going to delete this 4 colour gradient, change the solid colour to this colour here, say, and turn down the stroke thickness so we can actually see the circles a bit behind it. So that's kind of cool. And then I think maybe let's use another cut effect to add a bit of interest to this. So let's use these scan lines here. And I'll just turn the scan line amount up. You can see it's cutting through these centre bits here now. Let's turn down the width a little bit. And this is interesting, but it's not. It's sort of, we're seeing the gaps through it. So if I just change this bottom one here, it's going to offset the rotation of each scan line. Now you can see that we've sort of got this cool look to it. I'm just going to whack the amount up again. So we've got, this is more just a personal choice thing here. To make this look a bit more interesting. And let's adjust this a bit more so we're hiding the background. Well, here we go. Okay, so we've got a nice sort of cross-hatch effect on this now. And if I want to straighten this up, I can change the angle here. But let's have this sort of an angle like that. That looks quite cool. And I think this back layer here, the bottom layer here, actually we don't want to use this. So I'm going to take the very technical step of just deleting the scan lines effect off of this layer. And when you do that, you want to be careful that you actually want to delete it, because now on this layer I can't get back that scan lines effect. So if I wanted to, I'd have to duplicate one of these layers and then use that as the back layer. But in this case, I think I'm happy with this being like this. And let's do some more custom controls on here as well. I'm just going to adjust the stroke opacity a bit. Actually no, that's wrong. Let's change the colour here. Let's just make this sort of a really sort of pale dark red. There we go. This is a bit weird. I think normally you wouldn't want this this sort of aesthetically, but for this I think it'll work just fine. So now we've got this. So let's animate these as well. I think we're just going to use the scale again probably. We could use the cutout again, or we could slice these layers and offset the rotation on them. Mess with all these. But I think for now a scale will probably look best, just to fit with the way the background's animating. So we'll make these keyframes again, 100 at 1 and 0 at 0. Let's add an expo ease and whiz to these keyframes. Hit preview. Now you can see this is animating with these layers behind it. So that's cool. Maybe let's add in a little speed modifier as well. Just for the rotation. So rotation on scale again. Oops, I should go to where this is animating. Ah, I see. Because on scan lines now, we've got follow main rotation unticked. So this is quite a useful thing to show you as well. Because this is unticked, the scan lines are always going to be at the angle that we set them at a minute ago. If we do follow main rotation, it's going to take on it's going to add the rotation of the shape layer to it. So now when I animate it, you can see that it's using that speed modifier in the scan lines effect. So that might be a little too much, we'll see. Nope, that looks pretty good to me. Actually, let's just reverse that. So we'll make it come in the other direction. So 150 instead of minus 150 instead of 150. So now this is sort of matching up with the back layers quite nicely. And then later on we've got these layers disappearing out. So I think in this case I'm just going to scale these back down again. So let's put this at half a second, say. Scale that back to 0. So we've got the back layer scaling first here. I'm just going to change these easing things to, let's say, quart here, just to make it slightly less punchy. We might want it punchy sometimes, but I think maybe not just here. Cool. So I think actually when it's coming in, I'm happy with the back layer coming in first here. But I think when I want it to animate off, I actually want that to reverse a bit, so the top layer is going. And this requires a bit of finesse, but we're going to animate this time offset here. So it's set to -0.1 at the moment. If I just keyframe that, I'm just going to go to the very next keyframe and set this to +0.1. And I might have got that correct. So now you can see this is animating off. I'll just show you what happens if you do this wrong. So when, I'll just move this out of the way for a second. When this is animating on now, it's using this time offset. If we were to change the time offset halfway through, it would get a bit confused because the time offset's changed. So you can see here it sort of got stuck. Change it halfway through. So it sort of can't quite figure out what to do, so it's just skipped to the end bit. So when we're changing this time offset, we want to make sure it's at a time when nothing's happening. So if I move this over here, this is between the two keyframes here. So now you can see we've still got a little bit of a jump. We can finesse this a bit. And now this is working how we want it to. And I'm just going to move these keyframes across a bit again, just so this starts animating about the same time as the flower. Cool. So that's our flower animation. Cool. That looks pretty nice. I'm happy with that. I think what we're going to do, just for one last final step in this, is we're going to bake and freeze this layer again, this composition, the centre of flower composition, and then we're going to just convert this composition, and you'll see what I mean in a minute after we've baked this. So I will bake this again. Hit bake freeze, and I will see you again in a second. Okay, so the bake freeze is complete. You can see how quick this is again now. So now this composition is working fairly fast. We haven't got any real expressions active anymore. So let's make a couple of these all animate at the same time. So let's just do a clump of flowers for a nice romantic name. I'll create that composition, and I'm just going to start by deleting all of these Vigoro shape layers here because we're not going to need them. I'm going to come back in. We've got our centre of flower, which I should probably rename to flower, and I'm just going to drag this into this Vigoro layer here, and now you can see that's animating. But what I'm going to do, just to finish this up, is I'm going to convert this, hit convert layer with the flower composition selected, And now this is a Vigoro layer. So if I duplicate this a couple of times, you can see that it's offset in the size, which we don't really want in this case. So I'll just turn that off. And now we can use some of the Vigoro controls on this. So I'm just going to use a circular distribution again. Set this up. And now you can see we've got all these layers that we can control. And I'll tell you what, let's make this 3D. So I'm just going to toggle this. We could have created a 3D composition at the beginning, but I didn't. So I'm just going to make these all 3D now. And then on the distribution panel here on the controller, I'm just going to adjust the Z-axis positions here. So now we've got our Z-axis being controlled. So I'm going to whack that one quite a long way back. Let's add a camera. And then just grab this little camera tool up there. We can drag around and see that all these layers are now in 3D space. So if I were to add a couple more of these in, and say turn on the... Actually, let's make this slightly more interesting before we do anything much. I'm just going to hide that camera, go back to the controller, and I'm also going to change some of these distributions here. And this is going to mix with the circular distribution, so we can have some pretty cool effects here. And on these converted layers, just while I'm here, we can't do as much as we can with normal shape layers, but we can go through and change some options. So we've got this converted layer options down here. We can adjust the opacity of all these converted layers. We could adjust the scale of them if we wanted to. And at the moment, distribute around controller is ticked. So these are all scaling down towards the controller. If I untick distribute around controller and adjust the scale, they're going to be distributing of their own accord now. So I'm just going to tick that back on, so it's set up how we want. And we could use a couple of the cut effects. We can't use cutout or cut edge, but we can use all the other ones, so we can slice these layers up if we want. We could use a wave cut on them, and this all works in 3D space as well. So you can get some pretty cool effects with this. But for now we're just going to leave these sort of uncut. And we can also use things like motion blur now that these are 3D layers. Not motion blur, depth of field, sorry. We can use motion blur as well. We could go into this flower layer here, turn on the motion blur, and go into this petals composition and do the same thing. And we've now we'll now have motion blur running on this. So you can see we've got some nice sort of little motion blur when these petals are coming in. So now that we've got that, we can also come and add some depth of field in here. Let's just play with these a bit. Maybe aperture up, blur level up, and just play with these until we've got something that we want in focus. We can have this one at the bottom here in focus. Let's move this camera around a bit. And now we've got these sort of converted layers in a 3D composition. And we've created quite a cool thing there. So hopefully this was useful. Obviously you don't want to copy this tutorial exactly. It was more to show you what you can do. But if you want to copy it exactly, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. Hopefully it'll give you a bit more insight into what you can do with Vigoro and some of the other options we've got. And I hope you have fun. I'm really enjoying seeing what you guys are coming up with so far with Vigoro. So if you do make anything cool using Vigoro, just add a hashtag Vigoro onto it on Twitter, and I will find it and hopefully have a look at it. So enjoy. I will see you again soon. Thanks, guys.